ANEC Sports presents a Frick Media Productions, created by the founder and editor at the ANEC Network, Sam Frick. This is the opening drive. Welcome to episode 2 of the opening drive, a podcast that exclusively discusses football here in our coverage at ANEC Sports. My name is Sam Frick. I'm the founder and editor at Around the Northeast Corner, also known as ANEC Sports, covering schools across Northeast Indiana and Elkhart County. That includes our neighbors down in Marion, Indiana. And so we're going to be talking about the upcoming slate of games for week 3 of the high school football season and discuss 2 ANEC games of the week in our NECC area of the woods. Obviously, we'll have previews for those 2 games later on to go more in depth of those 2 matchups. But first and foremost, let's go ahead and take a look at our area conferences and schools to talk about when it comes to high school football. First, we want to take a look at the ACAC, and with the Adams Central Flying Jets coming off a 32-21 win against the Adams Central Flying Jets, where Jamison Roach was doing well, just about Jamison Roach things, running the football, running the offense. He had 10 tackles to lead the Jets. He's one of our nominees for this week's ANEC Football Performer of the Week. Let's see here. He ran for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns, threw for another 69 yards in the process. He also had a forced fumble and an interception in the process of defeating the Eastside Blazers by 11 points. They're going to be traveling to Muncie Central. They're going to be taking on the Bearcats of Muncie Central. They are coming off a 15-12 loss at the hands of Yorktown, following a 3-point win at Delta. I think that was their first win against Delta since, I believe I was told, 2007, if I remember right. Was that right? 2007 or 2006? Actually, since 2006 when they won the sectional championship at that season. So Muncie Central generally a trap opponent for Adams Central, but obviously the Jets will be favored on paper in that matchup there. Jay County's at Southern Wells. Jay County should be favored in that matchup. They're coming off a 35-point loss at the hands of Newcastle. And as for Southern Wells, man, they just can't catch a break right now. Southern Wells lost 2 close games in the first 2 weeks of the season at the hands of Elwood, 14-8, and then they lost a last-second field goal to Blackhawk Christian at Taylor University, 15-12. And so Southern Wells really feels like they had a couple of missed opportunities those first 2 weeks, and it doesn't get any easier when they host the Jay County Patriots, a team that had a really good first week, not a great second week. We don't know exactly where Jay County is in terms of the ACAC, but we do expect Jay County to be favorites going into that matchup at Southern Wells. And then one of our other ANEC games of the week will be South Adams at Bluffton. That'll be the first of 2 ANEC football games of the week, where the Bluffton Tigers host the South Adams Starfires in the ANEC football game of the week. And this is a rivalry that dates all the way back to the 1960s. So keep in mind that back then, these 2 programs were playing in the Northeast Indiana Athletic Conference, which that conference no longer exists. Essentially, in a roundabout way, the NEA is basically the indirect successor to the successor of the NEIAC, if it makes any sense whatsoever. And it's kind of complicated when we go back and talk about the history of Northeast Indiana football conferences, which obviously I'm going to get back to that at a later time and whatnot. But when you look at the series between Bluffton and South Adams, this is a series that dates all the way back to 1966, actually. And South Adams leads the series 39-20. Keep in mind that South Adams had owned this series for the majority of the 2010s and the 2000s and whatnot. But Bluffton, as of late, they've had their number of late against South Adams, winning 41-6 at Bluffton, and then 33-7 last year against the South Adams Starfires. And, the big thing that made it so impressive about last year was you had this young quarterback by the name of Axton Best, who kind of came out of nowhere and just had an amazing sophomore season for the Bluffton Tigers. And obviously we have Kamel Moore and Cooper Craig doing what they do best. But now you got this passing game going. That's something that we are still not accustomed to seeing even in 2025 for the Bluffton Tigers. But Bluffton showing their dominance on both sides of the ball, especially in last Friday's win against Manchester, 45-6, the home opening win for the Bluffton Tigers against the Manchester Squires, where Aston Best threw for 103 yards on 8 of 13 passing, 3 TD passes, 10 carries for 97 yards and 2 TD runs. And then on defense, 4 tackles, 1.5 TFLs, 1 strip sack, which led to a fumble, of course, in that win for the Bluffton Tigers. This will obviously be a challenging matchup on paper for Bluffton, and I know for the minds of Grant Mosier and the South Adams Starfires, that loss against Bluffton last year is definitely fresh on their mind, coming off of last season where South Adams had an up and down regular season last year. They went 8-6 overall in that 2024 season, but it was a 500 regular season for South Adams, and then they got hot at the right time, made it all the way to semi-state in Class 1A, where they fell at the hands of North Judson, who made it to Lucas Oil Stadium. And you got a matchup featuring 2 very talented quarterbacks in Titus Lehman of South Adams and Aston Best of Bluffton. South Adams known for their air raid attack. Bluffton these days have becoming more willing to throw the football, or more comfortable, I should say, throwing the football. But Bluffton obviously has the speed and the explosiveness that we have come to know with the Bluffton Tigers. Their defense is always quick to the ball as well. And I think that's something that's going to make this matchup very interesting on Friday night. Is you still have 2 contrasting matchups here between South Adams and Bluffton, but you got a lot of ballers on both sides of the ball for both the Bluffton Tigers and South Adams Starfires. 2 very experienced teams from last year with Lehman and Plattner, and I believe Somerset is still back at South Adams. Their experienced team that made it all the way to semi-state last year. Bluffton returns 20 starters back off of last season's squad. Will Patterson of South Adams is a running back. Wesley Somerset, Nathan Plattner, Manuel Juarez, right? Those are names there for the Starfires. And then Bluffton, I mentioned those names earlier for Bluffton, as well as a couple others I want to make sure I mention here for the Bluffton Tigers. And that would be Aaron Stravler. I mentioned that earlier. Griffin Morgan, their senior linebacker, averaging 14 tackles per game. We can't forget about him. How about John O'Leary Freeman, their O-line, D-lineman, 4 sacks this year for the Bluffton Tigers. So there are definitely some guys that can compete. Cooper Jenkins also plays both ways up front for Bluffton. So the Tigers and the Starfires have the weapons. It's going to come down to which team can be the sharpest on Friday night and be able to exploit the defense, if you would. And I think so far Bluffton has had the edge on South Adams, but let's not underestimate the fact that South Adams can throw the football at a high rate, and we still see that even in 2025. Grant Mosier Starfires can still throw that thing up in the air at an elite level. There's just not a lot of 1A schools that throw the football quite like the South Adams Starfires. They do so at an elite level, and that makes South Adams a very dangerous opponent for any team on Friday nights. So that's where things stand right now with Bluffton and South Adams. South Adams coming off a 56-point loss to Marion Local Ohio, a powerhouse school in Ohio, and then shut out Belmont 53-0. So obviously, this is the first real quality test for South Adams where they feel like they have a chance to win this game. And what a way to start the ACAC then. South Adams and Bluffton. And then Woodland Heritage, a East Allen County rivalry there. Woodland with a solid win against Central Noble. 31-8. CN is on a rebuild right now, but for Woodland to win by 25 points, coming off a 32-point loss to Eastside. Good bounce back win for Woodland against the Central Noble Cougars, but a big test coming up against Heritage, who is coming off an overtime win against Delta, 13-7. Boy, did Heritage need that win right there. Coming after losing by 40 points last season at Delta in the sectional tournament, to come out this season and winning that game in overtime, that just speaks a lot to the Heritage Patriots and the ability to be a consistent contender year in and year out. And I think the Patriots have to feel really good about themselves going into ACAC play, 2-0 record to begin the season for Heritage, and which is their 3rd straight season with at least a 2-0 start to the season. I mean, when you go back in Heritage's history, I mean, when's the last time Heritage has had 3 straight seasons where they started a season 2-0 or better? I mean, we're talking about the early 2000s, 2004, 2003 was 2 straight. I mean, that's the furthest you can really go back from. I mean, you also have 1998, 97, 96. That was 3 straight. Actually, take that back. 1995's 4 straight seasons with at least a 2-0 start for the Heritage Patriots. And so it's really reminiscent to the powerhouse teams from the late 90s and the early 2000s. Heritage looking to stay in that midst for the ACAC championship. They'll be favored against Woodland on Friday. Taking a look at the CIC, and you look at the CIC standings right now, Alexandria, Eastbrook, Madison Grant, Mississinawa are all 2-0 to begin the season. And particularly for our NECC area schools, Eastbrook, Madison Grant, and Mississinawa. Eastbrook, after a thrilling, kind of an ugly win at Huntington North, they go into Zollner Stadium in Fort Wayne and dominated the Concordia Cadets 41-14. And they were led in part by a solid running back in Ryder Gibson of Eastbrook, who ran for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also had a 99-yard pick six in that win for Jeff Adamson's Eastbrook Panthers. And the defense has been winning football games so far for Eastbrook, and that's going to have to continue if they want to contend in the Central Indiana Conference. As talented as Bodie Howe is for Eastbrook, it's going to come down to their play up front for Eastbrook to win the CIC. And things will start for them in conference play on Friday when they travel to Frankton to take on the winless Frankton Eagles, who have been absolutely obliterated to start the season. I mean, they lost by 29 points to a solid Tipton squad, which they've always well coached by the legend himself, Aaron Toll, the son of Mike Toll. And then they got absolutely obliterated by LaPel on the road, 49-2 at LaPel. That's a solid program down in the Anderson area. So obviously Eastbrook's going to be favored in that matchup, but this is a good way to get Eastbrook in the swing of things as they prepare for eventually, I would say, a pretty big matchup a week from now against Alexandria, which is going to be Eastbrook's home opener. Which, keep in mind, their home slate is on the back end of their schedule. They play a lot of road games early in the season, and they put most of their home games right into October, which makes this very interesting for Eastbrook, especially when you look at the state tournament where you may have to travel long bus drives in sectional play. A very interesting format for the Eastbrook Panthers in that sort. As for Madison Grant, they have not given up a single point yet. They have been perfecto defensively so far this year. Now, keep in mind, they are playing 2 rebuilding teams in Tri-Central, which unfortunately we found out Tri-Central did unfortunately cancel the varsity season. Now, they will play JV, but Tri-Central is not going to have a varsity team the rest of the season. And then they dominated Southwood 55-0. This is not the Southwood team from a decade ago, where Southwood was at the cusp of competing in the 1A state championship. They're not the same program anymore. They're definitely on the rebuilding side of things. Madison Grant's going to have another heavily favorable matchup this week when they host the Blackford Bruins once again at Madison Grant for the Argyles. They could be going into that matchup at Oak Hill 3-0, and there could be a possibility of 3 straight seasons with shutout wins. And I cannot recall the last time Madison Grant had ever started a season with 3 straight shutout wins. I may have to post a stat line of this if I can find it later on this week, but I cannot recall the last time Madison Grant had ever started a season with 3 straight shutout wins in their entire history, which, I mean, it's happened before in other segments. Like, for instance, the best one that comes to mind would have been 1996, where they had 4 straight weeks with shutout wins, but that was at the back end of the schedule in 1996, where they were giving up only 4.7 points per game before falling to Wabash in sectional play. That's back in 1996. So we're kind of putting a lot of comparisons to that 1996 squad, which they were coached by the legend Grant Zagunda, who is now retired. But Madison Grant looking like they're going to be on a collision course for that CIC championship run and whatnot. And then Mississinawa coming off a 38-12 win against Marion. A solid win for them against I would say a better squad in Marion. But obviously, I think Ole Miss was favored against the Giants. So to get those 2 wins under their belt is huge as they take on Oak Hill at Converse, Indiana. Converse, Indiana, the home of the Oak Hill Golden Eagles. Tough loss in the week 1 against Eastern Greentown. Boy, Oak Hill fans were not breathing easy in week 2 when they were hosting the Norwell Knights. They were down 25-8 going into the 4th quarter. And then in dramatic fashion, Oak Hill They scored 22 unanswered in the fourth quarter, including a touchdown run from Dylan Archer with just 12 seconds left to defeat Norwell 30-25 at home. And so Oak Hill, well, I guess it's not for the faint of heart. So a lot of close games so far for the Golden Eagles, and it's not going to get any easier with their next 2 weeks being at home against Mississinawa and Madison Grant. Boy, that's going to be a tough 2 weeks coming up for the Oak Hill Golden Eagles, who have definitely put themselves in very interesting situations, but still, nonetheless, 1-1 to begin the season for the Golden Eagles of Oak Hill. And then Blackford 0-2 to begin the season. Just a tough first 2 weeks for them. 56-6 loss to Jay County, and then they, led by Carmine Moreno, Fremont just destroyed Blackford's defense 63-21. And I hate to say this for Blackford, but this is not going to look like it's going to be any easier in week 3 at Madison Grant. So tune in next week where Blackford will probably have their first legitimate chance of maybe winning a football game when they travel to Elwood. But this is a tough week coming up for Blackford, facing a very good Madison Grant squad. Taking a look at the Northeast states, and right now you have Leo, Columbia City, and East Noble at 2-0. East Noble has been the dominant of the three, particularly on defense. They pulled off the win against the Snyder Panthers 29-7, although that game ended early because of a Snyder player needing medical attention late in the fourth quarter of that contest. And, well, I guess for good news for Snyder fans, if you haven't heard the news already, the player that was down and needed emergency care and help whatnots apparently was Isaiah Caldwell, their captain, number 55. Apparently he's in good spirits right now and doing well. And so I remember sharing this on my social media platforms and saying, what an amazing news. God is good all the time and whatnot. So good to see Isaiah Caldwell in a good spot right now. And we wish him well in his recovery for the Snyder Panthers. We'll talk about them in a matter of moments. But East Noble's got a big matchup at home against Huntington North. The Vikings 0-2, looking to get their first win of the season, but they have never beaten East Noble in football, and that's going to be tough to do so against the East Noble team that made 2 SAC squads look silly on the scoreboard. So it's going to be a tough matchup for Huntington North on Friday. And then you look at Columbia City, they're 2-0. They did not complete a pass at Northwood, but for some reason they were getting passes left and right against Plymouth and looked quite good against the Rockies of Plymouth. Now what does Columbia City do as they open NEA play? Well, they're going to be traveling to Belmont. They'll be heavily favored against the Belmont Braves. The last time Columbia City played the Braves, well, they lit up the scoreboard and won 61-0. And, well, Belmont is currently on a 34-game losing streak right now. It's not looking so great for Belmont right now. But so Columbia City should win this game on paper, but I'm curious to see what happens once we start getting to some of the more tougher matchups. That week 1 game is a good sign for Columbia City. What did they do from here? I think is going to tell another story. And then Leo, they're coming off a 21-6 win against Angola. The final ever meeting between Leo and Angola in football, at least for the foreseeable future, as Leo defeats Angola 21-6, led by Titus Stoller going for 166 yards on 14-19 completions, which is nice to see because we've heard a lot of Nathan Foster, Nate the Great. We all heard the hype with him. And so it's good to see somebody else getting some recognition for Leo. And I think Leo's going to need more of that as we get into the meat and bones of the Northeast states. But Leo's defense has been quite good so far. And the run defense has been spectacular. Their defense in general has been really good. The offense has had its moments, but for the most part, it's done its job. We'll see what Leo does coming up on Friday. We'll be traveling to Norwell at the Courtyard in Austin, Indiana. Norwell seeking their first win of the season. We'll see what Leo can do. The next 2 games are winnable games for Leo, so they have an opportunity to go into that East Noble game, which will very likely be one of the ANEC games of the week on September 19th in Canterville, where we could see a situation where 2 4-0 teams are squaring off in Canterville. Very, very possible in a couple weeks from now. And then DeKalb, what a great first win for the Cal Barons as they picked up a 28-7 win at Garrett. A comeback win for the Cal Barons. We saw a lot of maturity from Eli McCormick of the Barons. We saw a lot of good moments from Xavier Weiss coming in, whether it's running back or coming in up front in the offensive line, coming in quarterback in the third quarter, getting that big throw on the first drive of the second half to Xavier Bell to get the Barons moving the right direction, moving them chains. And then Xavier Bell just doing Xavier Bell things. Golly, Xavier Bell is probably one of the more underrated playmakers in all of Northeast Indiana. And Xavier Bell just showing you why he is one of the top receivers in Northeast Indiana with that tremendous series of catches, including the touchdown catch from 22 yards to give DeKalb the lead for good. And so good to see the Barons get that win under their belt. Coming off a tough loss to Angola in week 1. They got an opportunity ahead of them in week 3 at New Haven, which New Haven gave a scare on Northside last week. And we know New Haven has the athletes, but they're clearly in a rebuild right now for the New Haven Bulldogs. But I think for where things are heading under Coach Scheer, Vance Scheer of the New Haven Bulldogs, I think they're moving the right direction as a culture and as a program, but definitely trying to build the program back up again and get the Bulldogs looking like a disciplined team, a team that can play consistent on both sides of the field. And I think they're at least moving that right direction. And I think that week 2 team has to be encouraging for New Haven in the long run sort of things. But good win for Ryan Robertson, his first ever head coaching win as a head football coach, and a good win for DeKalb nonetheless, especially for a team that's trying to get into that Northeast State conversation and whatnot. And that's pretty much it for the NEA. We're going to try to go a little quick here. Take a look at the Northeast Corner Conference. We have the Big School Division where Fairfield West Noble sit at 2-0. Angola, Lakeland 1-1. Garrett is 0-2 and being outscored 35-7 the first 2 weeks. A little surprising there. In the Small School Division, the only team that's 2-0, well, that's the Fremont Eagles. They are 2-0 and they've outscored their opponents 105-27. Keep in mind, they were playing Blackhawk Christian and Blackford. So things are going to get a little bit more challenging for Fremont in the coming weeks ahead. Busco 1-1. They picked up a nice win against Bremen in week 1. I believe it was 36-7. Good win against a traditional power in Bremen. Eastside 1-1, but they have to feel pretty good about their where things are heading for Eastside, coming off a competitive loss to Adams Central, where it felt like they were in that game for majority of the contest. And, you know, seeing that combination of Joe Richmond and Noah Dove, I think has to be encouraging for Eastside. And it has to be bad news for the Small School Division. Central Noble, obviously, they're having some struggle. They're currently on a 13-game losing streak, dating back to last season. Prairie Heights, couple tough losses to Whitco and Bronson. But when you look at the slate of games coming up on Friday, Central Noble's at LaVille. LaVille, pretty good team over the last couple years. Their defense has been pretty stout. Well, it was decent last year. It was really good the year before that in 2023. It's not looking too great for CN. They got to make that drive all the way to South Bend, take on the LaVille Lancers, who are coming off a 7-point loss to North Judson. And for those that don't know, North Judson made it to state last year to 1A. So this is bad news for Central Noble. I don't like their chances against LaVille. And then you got Busco and Garrett. I think that's one of the premier matchups in the NECC. You know, it's a rivalry game. These two schools have known each other for quite a few years now. And Busco, they've had their number for a while at Garrett, but in recent years, Garrett has kind of flipped the script a little bit. You know, Garrett beat Busco 41-0 last year. Busco looking to get that win against Garrett's, really get their stamp on this NECC race when they start entering the divisional play. But getting that win against Garrett would be huge for Churubusco. Coming off a difficult 2-point loss to Lakeland. That one's got to sting for Busco because they knew they had this game against Lakeland, a really solid Lakeland squad, but just couldn't quite get enough points in the end zone. But their defense has been winning games for Churubusco so far. We know what the wing T can bring, but can they score enough points consistently on Friday nights? I think they show they can. This Garrett team's going to have to get some offense moving right now because Garrett's offense has been struggling. Yes, their defense has played well. It's been elite at times, but Garrett's inability to move the football has been a concern for Garrett, especially the fact that, you know, Wyatt Hefty hasn't been able to get the best out of himself with the offense not moving the ball well, struggling to protect Wyatt Hefty, not being disciplined is another issue for Garrett. And so they're going to have to get things moving pretty quickly because a week from now, you got the matchup at Lakeland, and that's a Lakeland team with weapons of galore, if you would. And then you got Eastside the week after, and then West Noble and Fairfield and Angola. It is boatloaded with high-quality teams after that Busco game. So Garrett's going to have to get things moving quickly if they want to stay in that hunt for the Northeast Corner Conference's Big School Division. A win against Busco would do wonders for Garrett on Friday night. Fairfield at Jimtown. I call this the Corey Stoner Bowl, if you would. And, this is a Fairfield team that had a win on the final meeting for the foreseeable future against Goshen, held off a late Goshen round to beat the Red Hawks 30-23. And then he got the win against John Glenn. And, this is their first win against John Glenn since 1982. First win at John Glenn since 1979. So that's a team that's had their number for quite a few years, even though they don't meet every year. But, for Fairfield, they were led in part by a very, very good performance from Warren Kaufman, their running back for Fairfield. 46 carries, 246 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 two-point conversions in that win against John Glenn. He's one of our nominees for Performer of the Week at NEC Sports for football, and he's right now competing quite well for that Performer of the Week spot right now. We are currently seeing a 2-horse race right now between Trey Schissler of West Noble and Warren Kaufman of Fairfield. So obviously Fairfield's got to feel pretty good about their 2-0 start under Corey Stoner. And we looked at this matchup in the Corey Stoner Bowl against the Jimtown Jimmies, who are in the opposite direction. They're 0-2. They lost to Wawasee 10-9 when Mr. Cash Money kicker, Cash Walter, he kicked a 27-yard field goal in the fourth quarter, about 6 or 7 minutes ago in the fourth quarter, to defeat the Jimtown Jimmies 10-9 at Wawasee, and then Jimtown with a 41-13 loss at the hands of Concord for Jimtown. So obviously Fairfield moving the right direction. Jimtown searching for answers as we get more into the conference play games for both for Fairfield and for Jimtown. Fremont and Angola. Angola, pretty promising first week against DeKalb. They struggled against Leo. I think that was to be expected. We'll see what they can do against Fremont at home. They should be favored in that game, which that's going to be huge because they got a big contest coming up next week against West Noble in Ligonier. They've had their recent struggles with West Noble. So that's a game they're going to definitely need to make sure that this week they are playing good football. So you want to make sure you're playing your best football going into divisional play. And then you got the milk can game between Lakeland and Prairie Heights. Obviously, Lakeland will be favored in that game. The big thing I want to see from Lakeland is can they start to get the offense clicking a little bit? They are having some struggles getting some points on the board. And I think the thing about this for Lakeland is their offense has struggled a lot, and yet they're still finding ways to find some good things out of games. And I think the Busco game, for Brandon Holbert to come into a less than ideal scenario against Churubusco and pull off a win like this, I think it shows you the maturity of Brandon Holbert. It shows you the maturity of the senior class at Lakeland. Now can Lakeland start to get some things ironed out under Tom Wilderman, really start to get the offense clicking, because they're going to need some points on the board when you're playing against teams like Angola and Garrett and West Noble and Fairfield. Going to need to get some things gelling here. They got the weapons to do so. It's all about can they iron out the mistakes and really start to play their best football as you get closer and closer to the end of the season. And then West Noble at Eastside, kind of a sneaky matchup. I think Eastside will be overlooked a little bit, but I think this is a game you got to be very careful of if you're West Noble. You got to feel pretty good about your first 2 weeks. You dominate Central Noble. You had a nice win against Wawasee, 35-19. Trey Schissler played very well against the Warriors, 282 total yards, 207 on the pass, 3 total touchdowns in that win for West Noble. You definitely got to be careful about looking past the Eastside Blazers. This is not the Eastside team of past seasons. I am fascinated to see how this Eastside offensive line performs against an always athletic West Noble defensive front. This should be a fun matchup in Butler. I think this one could be a sneaky matchup in the area. Taking a look at the Elkhart Lions. We don't really talk about the NIC too much, but Elkhart coming in at 1-1, following a very difficult loss against Concord, 35-29. Good bounce back win in Northridge, 17-7. Defense really played a pivotal role in that win for the Elkhart Lions, and that's going to need to continue that way because they get started with NIC play this week. They'll have a favorable couple weeks, particularly this week against South Bend, Washington in South Bend. But after that, and then you get New Prairie coming up, they're 0-2. So your first 3 weeks of conference play looked very promising for Elkhart. But once you get into the South Bend St. Joe game, which would be week 6, September 26th, St. Joe is going to be one of the top teams in the NIC, and then you got Penn the week after, Marion, and then South Bend Adams. So things will get a little bit difficult after that. So Elkhart definitely needs to make sure they can take advantage of these next 3 weeks so that they are ready to go for that matchup against St. Joe, which St. Joe looks really, really explosive right now. This should be a fun year for the NIC in general. you look at the NLC, and NLC is an interesting conference, right? It's always been an interesting conference. You got Concord 2-0. They had a gritty win against Elkhart in week 1, destroyed Jimtown in week 2, led by Reese Brevard, the talented running back for Concord. Now things start to get really interesting coming into week 3. You're going to Mishawaka, taking on a powerhouse Caveman program. This is a team that they've struggled with in the past. This is a team they've played quite a bit in recent years. I know they play each other in conference play now. They used to meet in the same sectional, but obviously there's still two familiar opponents for these two. And Mishawaka, we know what they are. They're known for that wishbone offense. Concord's more of a spread offense. This is one of those teams that it's going to be hard to prepare for Concord, and I'm anticipated to see how Concord is able to stop the run of Mishawaka on Friday. That will be a difficult matchup when they take on the Mishawaka Cavemen, who are coming off a tough loss in the backyard brawl against Penn, 28-22. So they're definitely chopping the lips to get a bounce back win on Friday night against Concord of all teams. And then obviously a week after, they'll host Northridge at Mishawaka. Keep in mind that their actual home stadium is under construction, so they are going to basically be road warriors the entire season. Also looking at some other matchups to watch in the NOC, you got Northwood at Wawasee. Northwood coming in 1-1 after a tough loss at Columbia City. Nice win against New Prairie on the road. Now you got a much improved Wawasee that you're going to be playing against. This is a team they've owned in the series history, but Wawasee under Matt Thacker has improved significantly. Their defensive rush has been amazing for Wawasee. This is a team that plays high energy football. You expect that from Matt Thacker, but this Wawasee team is not gonna. They're not gonna lay down. They're not gonna be pushed aside here. If you would, they'll definitely put their best effort against Northwood. So the Panthers cannot look past the Wawasee Warriors. I know they're looking ahead to that matchup against Mishawaka, but I think you got to be really careful about underestimating the Wawasee Warriors' heart and effort. That's one thing I love about Wawasee so far is they always have an edge. They always play hard. That's one thing I always love about Matt Thacker's teams. They always play hard. Plymouth at Northridge. Northridge 0-2, two tough losses to Northside and Elkhart. I think they're a better team than what you're seeing so far from Northridge. I expect Northridge's performance to start to increase, and I think against Plymouth, this is an excellent opportunity for Northridge to really start to put some wind under their belts and see what they can do in conference play after two tough losses. Let's see what Northridge can do in conference play against Plymouth, a team that Northridge has owned in recent years after Plymouth dominated the series for decades. Northridge has had the edge in recent years. It's one of our featured matchups to watch is that Northridge-Plymouth game. Really fascinating to see if the offense can start to click for Northridge. If the defense can do it has been doing its job. Can the offense get some points on the board? This could be a confidence-boosting game for Northridge if they can get it done on Friday night. Plymouth 0-2, tough losses to Tippy Valley and Columbia City. Much the same of Northridge. I don't think they're that bad of a football team. Now let's see what Plymouth can do in conference play. So something's got to give in that matchup between Plymouth and Northridge. Somebody's going to get their first win of the season there. And then Warsaw and Goshen. I will say this for Goshen. Great first win under Joey Hidlinski at South Bend, Washington, 38-21. This is a much improved Goshen squad, a team that's been kind of pushed around the NOC for a little bit. They're going to be underdogs, obviously, against Warsaw, a team that made it to the state finals last year in 5A. And Warsaw, they had a tough loss to Warren Central, 28-14. But I think it's a game that you look at and say, we can build upon that performance against Warren Central. The win at Snyder shows how much potential Warsaw has in 5A. So I think Goshen's got their work cut out for them at home against the Warsaw Tigers. Warsaw should be heavy favorites in that matchup. Taking a look at the Indiana Northern States Conference, we primarily cover Tippy Valley, Bremen, and Jimtown. Tippy Valley has been the more impressive of the three teams so far. 2-0, outscoring their opponents 27-5. What's interesting about their last performance against Rochester, they won the game by basically a hockey score, 7-2, or you can say baseball score, depending on what it is. 7-2 final for Tippy Valley at rival Rochester. So defense really has been stout for Tippy Valley. This is their best start on the defense side of the football since 1976. Holy Toledo, 1976. You know what I'm talking about, right? Tippy Valley, they were a powerhouse in the 70s, won a state championship in 1979. This is during the old school era of the football state tournament where not everybody made the tournaments. So we're talking historic territory for Tippy Valley's defense. And, well, we'll see what the defense can do on Friday night when they make their last non-conference tune-up game at Hamilton Heights, a winless Hamilton Heights squad, before they really get things rolling in conference play the following week when they host perennial power Knott's and the talented Miles McLaughlin, who seemingly cannot be stopped on the ground. He's rushing for over 7,000 yards in his career, it seems. And my gosh, one of the greatest running backs of all time in the state of Indiana. This should be a fascinating matchup between Valley and Knox when we get there, but obviously we got to take care of this week first. Bremen, tough first 2 weeks. Lost to Busco by 29, got shut out by Triton. That is only their 6th loss all time against Triton, and Triton has rarely won at home. So this is not a good start for Bremen. That's not encouraging for first-year head coach Justin Lagunia of Bremen. He's known famously for his time at John Glenn. So a lot of success at Glenn during his tenure there in the 90s and early 2000s. Let's see what Bremen could do, but not a great start for the Lions, particularly on offense. We'll see if they can get some points on the board against Boone Grove on Friday night. And then obviously I mentioned Jimtown's had their struggles offensively as well. Now let's shift over to the Summit Athletic Conference. And when you look at the SEC, Northrop 2-0 for the first time since 2020. Northside 2-0 for the first time since 2012. I don't think anybody had this on their bingo card. And by the way, coming up on this show, I'll be speaking with the Northside head football coach, Ben Johnson, as we preview our other NECC football game of the week, which is Northside traveling to Northrop. Somebody's got to start the season 3-0, right? Northside or Northrop is going to be able to fulfill that task. We'll talk about that game later on. But you got Dwayner 1-1, Homestead 1-1, right? And they're the only other 2 teams that have a win on their schedule so far this season. I think Dwayner in particular is pretty impressive considering they held Roncalli to 3 points, which Roncalli, unlike some of their sports, they're not necessarily a powerhouse in football, unlike some sports like volleyball and basketball in some cases and whatnot. But still, to hold Roncalli to 3 points is good. But I think what made it more impressive was the fact they hosted St. Francis de Sales, a private school in Toledo, and won this game 31-15. That's a big win for Bishop Dwayner. How many times have we seen Dwayner just get beat around the first 2 weeks of the season? You know, they got destroyed by Cincinnati Moeller twice. I mean, man, Wheat Chew the last couple years just hasn't been Bishop Dwayner's friend at all the last couple years. And for them to get a win this early in the season, I think just shows you just how much growth Dwayner has had on the defensive side of the football. And that's been key because Dwayner hasn't been scoring a ton of points on a consistent level, but I think Wheat Chew's performance has to be encouraging going into the matchup at Wayne, which the Wayne Generals have had their issues on both sides of football in a new regime for Wayne Generals under Darian White. Shut out by East Snowball, lost a good Riley team 33-6. So Wayne's got a lot of work to do leading up to that matchup against Dwayner, a team that they have struggled consistently to win on the football field. So Dwayner, I think, will be favored on Friday night. I will say this. I think we got to be careful because I think Wayne still has the athleticism to put up a good fight against Dwayner. But I think the defense of Dwayner, I think, has to be a little bit concerning for Wayne going into SAC play in that aspect of things. And obviously with Bishop Dwayner, we know they're known for their physicality, their defense, their discipline, the Dwayner way, if you would, for the Bishop Dwayner Saints. That's a football powerhouse. This is a team that can obviously run the football a little bit, but led by Augustus Tipman, their senior running back. You got Douglas Henry at running back, outside linebacker, 15 tackles per game. Carter Zent, the junior free safety with 2 picks. Henry Jordan looking respectable at quarterback for Dwayner Saints. Beckham Russell, solid wide receiver and corner for the Saints. And then you got Xavier Doug at smarts the spot on the defensive end and slop at 2 caused fumbles there. So Dwayner's obviously doing a lot of good things, especially on defense. And I think Wayne's going to have some challenges coming up against Dwayner. Snyder and Bishop Lures, both teams 0-2, but Snyder, a surprising defeat at East Snowball last week. Snyder just never got things rolling. with their offense. East Noble just played a stout defensive performance against Snyder. I think we can't make excuses here. I mean, Warsaw with an inspirational performance at Spuller Stadium. East Noble with a great defensive performance, just a great effort all around for East Noble against Snyder. The Panthers just flat out were outplayed on Friday night last week at East Noble. This is a game, this is kind of a wake-up call game for Snyder. They need to get things moving the right direction going into SAC play, and this is a difficult matchup coming up against Bishop Luers, a team that's been kind of snake-bitten a little bit. They're not scoring points, but it's not for a lack of trying. The sophomores of Luers have been promising, but I think reality's kind of settled in a little bit that maybe Bishop Luers, maybe just a little young, a little inexperienced in the skills position. But, Luers' defense has held their own. They're getting their job done defensively. But the issue right now has been getting the ball to their skill players and getting it into the end zone has been a struggle for the Bishop Luers Knights. But you got Brandon Gaithier, the second at running back, Nate Javins, who's been one of their bright spots for Luers at wide receiver. You got the quarterback of Thomas Riker, who has shown some flashes of potential. I think it's just a matter of consistency. Taking care of the football is going to be key for him at Bishop Luers, right? But I mean, the defense is pretty good. Ale Taylor with QB hurry and whatnot. Jerron Taylor with a sack, leading the team in tackles per game, 10.5 tackles per game. Chuck McBride on the defensive end, right? So the seniors have done their job. I think the sophomores definitely have to grow up. But I mean, for Bishop Luers, I think they're fine. I think people need to don't panic with Snyder. Don't panic with Luers. They're going to be fine. It's just going to take a little bit for those two teams to play their best football towards the end of the season. Luers is definitely going to be a team to watch in the next couple of years because I think they're going to have a team that I think could contend in the SAC. They'll certainly compete in 3A no matter what because it's Bishop Luers. But the SAC-wise, I think it might be just a year away from really competing in the SAC. But I'm curious to see what the young kids of Luers and Snyder do. Obviously, with Snyder, that they have the running back of Jordan Davis at Snyder. And obviously, he is a really good running back for the Snyder Panthers. But look, all things considered, Snyder needs a little more offensive support right now. Offensive line has been banged up a little bit. That hasn't helped much for Snyder. But, I mean, right now, Snyder just needs a little bit of confidence coming in to SAC play. A win against Luers would be massive for the Snyder Panthers from that scheme of things. And when you look at the SAC in terms of contenders, Carroll 0-2, and I still think they're contenders in the SAC, despite the fact that they're 0-2. But keep in mind who they've played those first 2 weeks. Hamilton Southeastern and Center Grove, two of the great Indy area schools in the state of Indiana for football. HSC was right there in the tiptoes of Carroll just a few years ago. Center Grove State just a few years ago, and they've been a perennial power for so many years. Carroll showed some bright moments with Gabe Freisinger at quarterback. Jaden Van Pelt returned the action last week, had a 3-touchdown game. He's also a nominee for Performer of the Week at NEC Sports. Carroll's fine. I think with Carroll, can they take care of the football, right? With Carroll, can they also find some, get things kind of ironed out a little bit offensively as they get ready to play their SAC competition and whatnot. But Carroll obviously has the talent to win on Friday nights, and they'll have a favorable matchup on Friday at Concordia, a young Concordia team, a team that's kind of on a rebuild, if you would. Now, Concordia has shown some good things, but right now with the K-Dats, a very difficult schedule ahead as they take on the Carroll Chargers at Zollner Stadium on Friday night. And then you look at Homestead and Southside. Southside, obviously, with a couple tough losses, particularly to Marion. That's a game they probably should have won. But Homestead, in particular, that was not a favorable matchup for them going in last week at Noblesville, where they got blown out by Noblesville. Homestead came back and defeated Noblesville 13-10, despite the fact that they were without Michael White, which he is out indefinitely due to an injury. But the backup coming in for Homestead, the junior quarterback for Homestead, which is Logan Frieden, solid, admirable job for him coming in as a quarterback for that game. Carter Kenny with 2 touchdowns in the win for Homestead. The defense has done its job, much like what we talked about with Bishop Luers. Homestead's defense has done its job through 2 weeks. Now, can Homestead get the offense rolling? And they're going to need Logan Frieden to do his thing at quarterback on Friday night at Southside in the weeks to come. But Homestead's defense is very good. Now, can the offense finally get something cooking as they get into SEC play against Southside, an energetic Southside team, an athletic Southside team, but it's a flawed team no less. And so SEC play looks very, very fascinating as we get into conference play. And then lastly, let's take a look at the Three Rivers Conference. Right now, we have McConaughey, Lewis Cass, Manchester, Peru, and Rochester all sitting 1-0 in conference play, particularly with their ANEC member schools of Manchester, Rochester, and Witt being 1-0 in conference play. And when you look at the slate so far, Whitco with that win against Prairie Heights, 30-22, the first win under Thomas Tyree in his head coaching career. And then Whitco had a good effort against Peru last week. Just couldn't quite get it done for 4 quarters against the Peru Bengal Tigers. Whitco moving the right direction. Now the Cats are going to look to compete again on Friday night when they host an improving, but definitely a more superior defense in Rochester, who had just kind of a heartbreaking loss for Rochester. Kind of an ugly game for the Zebras offensively. 7-2 loss to Tippy Valley, coming up a 42 win at Southwood. Rochester definitely needs a get-right game at Whitco. This is the opportunity for the Zebras to get some confidence back on the offense of the football, looking to get that second conference win under their belt here. You look at Manchester, great first win against Northwestern first week of the season. A difficult loss in week 2 against Bluffton. Now Manchester looks to reset this week when they host the Wabash Apaches, who have, let's just put it this way, they have really struggled to keep the ball out of the end zone. It's been a difficult first 2 games for Wabash, to say the least. So Manchester has a great opportunity in front of them to get that second conference win under their belts. For Squires and the Northfield looking to get their first win of the season when they host McConaughey. And then Southwood also looking for their first win of the season when they host Northwestern, a team that also is seeking their first win of the season. And so that's where things stand for the opening drive and the slate of games coming up for high school football season and whatnot. And then real quick, just want to quickly mention Blackhawk Christian, since they are an independent for the Braves. Nice first win of the season for the Braves against Southern Wells. Now they're going to be at Westell on Friday, looking to get that second win of the season against Westell. A lot of road games coming up for Blackhawk Christian. They won't be playing at home really until October 3rd. Only 2 real home games for the Braves this season. So they're going to be on the road a lot for the Braves. Opportunity for them to win their second in a row at Westell. So that will do it for the opening drive and the slate of games coming up for high school football. Now I will turn over to my interview with the head coach of the Northside Legends, Ben Johnson. All right, I'm here with the head football coach of the Northside Legends, Ben Johnson, as his team is off to their best start since 2012 at 2-0. They'll be taking on the Northrop Bruins, who are also 2-0 as one of our top games of the week at NECC Sports. And Coach Johnson, this is your 5th season, I believe, in Northside, and this is a team that's building their way up and trying to repeat what they've done in 2022. But this is a team with a lot of potential and a lot of talent on display.
Oh, absolutely. We definitely, trying to match 2022 or outdo 2022.
That is for sure. And when you look at this Northside squad, Coach, you got Jaden Rivers at quarterback for the Northside Legends. You got the Moore kids led by Malik and Sebastian Moore, Caleb Keenely at the running back position. You got some guys on the defense side, like Marcus Williams, Jalen Jackson, Leslie Woodson at the pass rushing position, BJ Johnson at the secondary. You got a lot of weapons at Northside. Talk about what this group has done to put themselves in a position where Northside is competing in the SAC, at least on paper, so to speak.
I think it started in the off season, man. December, our kids just came together. Our junior and our senior class, they got real close, and they just want to do something different. They've seen success from past teams, and they just knew, it starts in the weight room. It starts working out together. It starts loving each other more, becoming more as a family, become more of a tight-knit group, and just playing for the man next to you. That's just the key. We just been preaching, be a great teammate, be a great teammate. The we over me mindset, and the kids has been buying into that. And I think I think that's what speaks for our success that we've been having so far.
One of which is your quarterback, Jaden Rivers, who was not your starting quarterback last year. He comes in this year, and he is off to an amazing start, completing 70% of his passes, 6 touchdown passes for the Northside Legends against some pretty quality competition, particularly with Northridge in particular. Can you talk about the development of Jaden Rivers as a senior this year at quarterback?
Jalen Rivers is a phenomenal player. He's very smart. He has a big arm. He has a great frame for a quarterback. He understands the game. He's a good leader. He gets his teammates involved. We always celebrate the O line, and the O line just been keeping him clean for the first couple of weeks. They've just been doing a fantastic job and giving him time back there to read the defenses. Like I said, that kid is he's a great kid and gets the game and understands, and he's been in hostile situations before, so he's pretty used to um, being in the fire. So that's always good when you got an experienced guy back there.
And he's had quarterbacks to kind of lean on in the past too. Which one of which in 2022 you had Bodie Dickerson at quarterback at Northside back
Yeah.
in that season, that special year and whatnot. You have the wideouts learning from guys that came from Northside like Tate Johnson, for instance, who's now at Notre Dame. And so the culture has been built from that 2022 squad leading up to these past several years and whatnot. When you look at the Legends, you beat Northridge 21-7. That was a game where, you had Jaden Rivers playing well, but it was also your defense making plays in your home opener. And then you got the game against New Haven in week 2, kind of a trap game for your team. New Haven actually got off to a really good start in that first half. New Haven with basically no pressure whatsoever, really jumped on you early, but you responded well in the second half to get that win. Just talk about how those first 2 games have helped prepare you for the SAC, especially when you got Northrop coming up this coming Friday.
Well, we've been playing Northridge for the last 3 years, and they're a phenomenal program. I would say like 4 years ago, they was in the state final. So those kids are well coached. They got a great community behind them. Those kids play hard. They're physical. So they just gives us, a physical test week 1. And just like any other head coach, you don't really know what your team looks like until you play somebody else. All summer long, you just kind of like, I think we're going to be good. I think we check off all the boxes until you get out there and get to playing. Northrop was a great opponent. We got up early on them. And then, they made some adjustments. And, shout out to our defense and our defensive staff, for keeping them, from not putting that many points on the board and for us to get that W. And then, going into the New Haven game, I knew New Haven was missing some players from week 1. So, it's one of those things where you don't ever want to look ahead. You always want to respect every opponent, and that's why I was preaching it. To our staff, to our kids. We can't look ahead. I don't care what happens to a team the previous week. Those coaches are going to grind the following week. Those players are going to get better, and that's exactly what they did. New Haven came out. They came out fighting, like I knew that they would. And they got some really great players over there, a good coaching staff as well. And it was another good test for us. They did some great things offensively. That's very different from traditional offenses. That you see in the Fort Wayne area. And I think New Haven is going to shock some people when they start conference play. And now we're here for Northrop, and Northrop, they will bring a lot of challenges to the table for us. With speed and. They gotten better in the trenches, and they got good coaching as well, and a phenomenal quarterback, 3-year starter. That kid can sling it. We have to be disciplined. We have to trust our eyes and trust our keys and do what we're coached to do, and just the main thing is just stay disciplined for 48 minutes.
Yeah, he kind of stole my thunder there because that's what I was leaning into the Northrop matchup, because when you look at this Northrop team, they have the talent much like your team as well. And you look at the series dating back to 1971, Northside leading the series 31-27. Last year was a 29-22 ball game, so this was a competitive game, even with Northrop not be able to maintain that start last year. But this year, Northrop obviously better up in the trenches. David Callison, a very experienced quarterback, threw for 5 touchdowns against New Haven. And then you got the wide receiver, Quay Guilford, who I believe is an Ohio State commit. So he is an electric wide receiver. The thing that concerns me if I'm looking at that matchup for Northside is that, we talked a lot about Guilford and Callison, but Northrop is just as good beyond those 2 guys. And I think that's the concerning factor coming in. And then you talked about the front line being better. They have 4 sacks on the season so far, which that's going to test your offensive line again. But what are some other things that stand out about the Northrop Bruins that you've seen a big jump this year?
A lot of people don't talk about their running game. They can actually run the football. They got a couple of kids back there that can run the ball very well. Again, I know the receivers get all the shine and the love, and the quarterback being really good, but they also got a good D line as well. They got a kid on that D line that's causing a lot of havoc in the backfield, which is helping their DBs cover better, which is was already good. Their linebacker play has improved as well. So overall, I just think top to bottom, Northam has a really good team. Um, I was very impressed with them on their film, and again, I know Coach Boone was gonna go over there and get that school turned around. He's doing a phenomenal job at doing that, and that's what makes this matchup so intriguing. They got really great players over there, and they're playing hard, and the players that's not getting a lot of recognition. Uh, they got them. They got them in. They got them in every position. So it's definitely going to be a tough challenge, but we will be ready come Friday night.
That indeed, as Coach Ben Johnson, Northside Legends, they look to go 3-0 on the season and start the SAC play 1-0 for Northrop, looking to get their first 3-0 start since 1984. It's been a long time for the Northrop Bruins and whatnot. Coach, I want to ask you another question about your team. We talked a lot about the big names at Northside. Who's that one guy that nobody talks enough about that really is kind of the glue of the Northside football team this year?
Um, I'll name two guys. Uh, I would say one of them would be Leslie Woodson. That's on the D line. He's a defensive end, great pass rusher. Um, and then I'll say a Marion Waits, another guy that's played inside on the D line. This guy's been a 2-year starter for us. Very smart, great hands. He's a really good leader. Cause havoc, you know, in the backfield. Him and Leslie, they anchor that D line. And then just one more other kid I want to shout out is Jannard Moore. He's really been a glue for our team, a great teammate. We could pretty much put him at 5 or 6 different positions, and he's going to thrive. Great young man. Yeah, those 3 kids right there, they definitely been the glue to our team.
That is for sure. A lot of energy and the glue with those two guys there as the Northside Legends looking to build off of the success of these first 2 weeks. And this leads to my kind of my last question here for you, coach. You obviously have established tenure head Northside about 5 years or so. So you've seen plenty of guys coming
Yeah.
through Northside and whatnot. A lot of history with Northside over nearly 100 years of football at Northside High School. The SEC has seen its peaks and valleys, its evolution on the way in football. We've seen the SEC recently make changes to allow your team and others in the SEC to start playing non-conference teams the first 2 weeks of the season. But I want to ask you my final question is, what is it like being a part of the Northside community, building this relationship with the football team and the community here in Fort Wayne, and just talk about the memories you've built with Northside that, regardless of what happens this year and the years to come, you're going to remember for the rest of your life?
Oh man, it's just when I walk down K Hall and you just see all that history, back from they was playing like in the 1930s. It's just crazy that um, Northside was one of the first high school teams to have a football team, and then we have homecoming, and we got a great alumni association. So just getting to meet those guys, and from back in the day, and getting to talk to them about some of the rich tradition that they had back then. That was been my goal since I became the head coach. Was I want to get back to the North Side winning ways and traditionally winning every single year and being one of the top programs in this city. Northeast Indiana. Just been building it. One day at a time, one game at a time, one season at a time, and the plan that we've had from day one. It's starting to come to fruition. This senior class, this eighth grade class won the city championship at Lakeside. So they were like my first like eighth grade class that came in as I was a head coach. So, now that they're seniors, so they didn't see, the wins, they didn't see, losing the close games, and they just know what it takes to win. So it's definitely like a different vibe there. But with the tradition of the band program, the band program has always been tied to the football program. Shout out to Mr. King. It's a rich tradition. Basketball is a basketball school. So I just taking a job at Northside. I just wanted to make football powerhouse to go along with how great our band is and how great the basketball program has always been. And then, for us three to be really good and for it to bleed into the other sports and, raise up the other sports as well.
Yeah, I can hear Ryan Hall somewhere smiling, from Grin to Grin, talking about the past of Northside and bringing back the winning ways of
Man,
the
shout out
legends.
shout
So
out to Ryan Hall.
obviously,
Ryan
it's
Hall is
always
a
a
great
pleasure to
coach.
talk about.
Yeah, shout out
Yes,
to
he
Ryan
is
Hall. He was a
indeed
great
one of
coach,
the great
man.
football
Yeah,
minds in the state of Indiana.
yeah, man. I think he won an
All
SAC
right.
title. Won an SAC title since 2013. So that's one of our goals this season. He was able to accomplish that. I think he came in between like 1 point for winning the sectional championships. He was very close to winning one. So yeah, on his time at Northside, he definitely was able to make some things happen and have some success at Northside.
Yes, indeed. Coach, any final thoughts before we let you go? Talking about the Northside Legends.
I'm proud of our players. They're great young men to work with. Love our staff. Staff is great. Our parents are great. Our families. Our administration at Northside. We have a great community. And I'm just excited for this Friday night. When is the last time have you ever heard of a Northside versus Northrop being a game of the week? I don't think it may have been a long time since that's ever happened. So that's kudos to Northrop as well, and all the work that they're putting in with their program over there. So I'm excited about this Friday night. I just feel like this is going to be one of those nights where the stands are just packed out because everybody just wants to see these two talented teams. So I am very appreciative to be in this opportunity. And I want to say thank you again, Sam, for this interview, man. And I see all the work that you do and keep it up, man. For sure.
Thank you, Coach, and good luck to you and your Northside Legends as you look to go 3-0 when you take on the North of Bruins at Spiller Stadium. Good luck, Coach.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you so much.